Hey guys, so I had this dream in late January of this year, late January 2025. I'll just get straight into it. So please refer to the disclaimer in the description box below. So I was dreaming about other stuff, then the scene switched, and I saw an image. Sophia, the Holy Spirit, she showed me the scene, and I saw an old friend of mine who I'm no longer friends with. It's because he turned out to be toxic and narcissistic and very arrogant. So he would act like he was above others, and he was very overconfident. And this is something. I'll just be straight. God has straight up told me this is an issue. The American cultural shadow, the core of it is arrogance at this time. I'm not picking on the US. I'm just had a dream where I got told that the core issue of the cultural shadow of the US right now is just appalling levels of arrogance. That's the core of it, and that comes from pride. And pride is it's kind of the cardinal sin. It's the C.S. Lewis described it as the anti-God state. It's the sin from which all other ones kind of stem. Because once you're prideful and like you think you are God, well then you can't. I think there's a quote. There's a quote: "Intelligent people learn from everything and everyone. Average people learn from their experiences, and stupid people already have all the answers, so they already know everything, or they think they do." Yeah. So if you once you're in a prideful state, you can't be corrected. You won't receive correction. You won't receive discipline. From God, or from like the high something from something higher from God essentially, and you won't receive teachings. You none of that. You think you are God. So, and then gluttony, lust, you know, wrath, sloth, all the other sins, selfishness. There's so many. Like just yeah, they all kind of come from there. And I don't think pride and arrogance, and even arrogance, aren't unique to the US. I've encountered appalling levels of arrogance. Similar, I found it similar in New Zealand, and just for context, because I have to be careful here because I'm not American, so I've got to be careful that I'm not pointing. It doesn't come across like I'm pointing the finger because I'm not. So just for context, I've been shown that told in another dream, the core aspect of the New Zealand cultural shadow is tall poppy syndrome. So it's kind of a weird combination of self hatred and envy, where we have to cut down other people who do well and bully them. I experienced that growing up here. You win science competitions and everyone mocks you, or like, yeah, for doing well. It's kind of like a anyway, but don't want to go off on a tangent. And for the record, just to be clear, of the five Anglo-Saxon countries, I've been shown that. So while I'm pointing out issues with the USA, to be fair, I've been shown by God actually that while both New Zealand and the US are both naturally good people, and that they're both currently sick, but New Zealand is much sicker than the US. So New Zealand is a lot darker than the US, even though the US is pretty dark. So, which is saying quite a lot because the US is pretty. A lot of the US is very fallen right now, and so why do I say all that? Because I had this friend who you knew in the past and turned out to be just the, like I was showing him in the dream. He's okay. Okay, this old friend of mine, just to zip forwards a bit, is kneeling, kind of in shock, and he's kneeling on the ground, and he's got his hands on his knees, and he's kind of hunched over, and I can he's just in shock, and I can see him. He's humbled, and he's just, as I said, in shock, and he's beside what looks like a stream, and I see these trees above him that you get in the south, and there's all that flying, what they call Spanish moss, like drape coming off. It looks like a lichen. I think it's actually an air plant. I'll put a link to what that plant is in the description box below. What I'm talking about, the Spanish moss. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you can see it there. But for people who some people will already, but it's a characteristic of some landscapes in the southern part of the United States, and yeah, he was kneeling beside what looked like a river, but it wasn't a river. It was the Mississippi River, but the Mississippi River had expanded and opened up into an inland sea. And that's what he was kneeling beside. So it was like he was it's almost like he was weeping. He wasn't quite weeping. He was sort of, he might have been slightly actually. I couldn't quite do it, but he was definitely in shock. And he was sort of if I had to summarize it, he was in shock. He'd been humbled from his previous arrogant state. He represented the United States in aggregate as a country. And as I said earlier, God has told me that the core issue with the psychological shadow, the core like sin of the US right now is appalling levels of arrogance. And that's why God showed me this ex friend of mine in the dream, because that's why I had to end the friendship. It was just, uh, yeah, I had quite a few of these issues with people like this in Vilcabamba, and the like when I was in, I just got sick of it when I was in Ecuador. I just started telling them to f off, and I just blasted them and told them what I thought of them. I was like, like, I'm not your effing, I'm not your freaking, I'm not your little servant. I'm not your freaking colony. You know, I'm Spanish Kiwi, but when pushed, I guess I react with a bit of the soul of both. But I feel more Spanish overall. It just kind of, it's just fiery energy. It's like f you. I'm European. We're like, don't try and dominate me like I'm some little subservient country. We've got, our culture's much more advanced and uh, older than yours in many ways. If God teaches us that everyone is equal, both countries and nations. So actually, I don't treat make a point of I make a point of making a concerted effort to not treat anyone like they're below me. But by the same token, I do not allow anyone to treat me like they're beneath them. And I mean, yeah, it got like most of the Americans in Vilcabamba were nice, and it happened with some other people from Anglo-Saxon countries there. It was just most of the Anglo-Saxons there are Americans. So, like as I said, Americans aren't the worst of the group, but yeah, it was just, it happened with some Canadians too, and some Brits, and some Australians, and Kiwis when I was in South America too. I just got sick of it. Um, just tell them to f off, and they get really upset, and then you're the problem because they're not used to it. And these people often just live in social circles where everyone is somewhat narcissistic and arrogant. So if you do it, you're the problem, and they live in it's a closed system. Closed systems. This is a download I had from the Holy Spirit in the last couple of months. Closed systems invariably collapse. Open systems inevitably evolve. So all the Anglo-Saxon countries right now are very much satanic, fallen Babylonian. They're closed systems. So it's like, I'm right, you're wrong. I don't listen to anyone else. I'm God. Yeah. So Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the UK, US, all like this. Generally speaking, like the US is the exception to the rule in the sense that there are some pockets of the US that are still really good and Christian, large pockets, and there's remnants in all five of those countries. But uh, yeah, they're all pretty far gone in that sense. And this is incidentally why a lot of the people in these countries cannot even conceive that all these catastrophes are coming, because they just live in their own little bubble. They're very insular. They don't, yeah, not interested in other cultures. Anything different is bad, and we just judge it, and we just stick to our own group, and like just we're not open to external information because we're closed systems. So of course they're going to get the shock of their lives when they get nuked, because they just live in a bubble, right? They live in a bubble, and yeah, I mean this guy, I guess God used him as he was symbolic for me in the dream of the United States overall. But there are parts of the US that are more godly, that are kind of not so bad. I find parts of the Midwest, Greater Appalachia, and parts of the South are really good. So it's yeah. It's a little bit more complicated when you get beneath the hood. It's because it's countries are very. It's not, the US is far from monolithic culturally. Studies have been done on this. There's a guy who wrote a book some years ago called, I think it's like the 11 nations. Oh, I forget the name of it. I'll put the link in the description box below. You can divide the US up into about 11 nations culturally, though. And I find it like at least three or four are really good, or like pretty good still. There's still quite a lot of godly people there. But a lot of the others are completely Babylonian, and unfortunately, overall, the country's fallen in aggregate, just like the UK, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. And I've been showing the US is, yeah, it's kind of middle of the group, and it's an odd one because there are a lot of really really positive people who are still godly and good, but then there's very very good people there, and there's very very bad people there. It's quite extreme, and it's kind of in the middle of the group of those five countries. I've been showing Canada and New Zealand are the darkest. England's surprise was a little bit surprising to me. Was actually more in the middle, and Australia's sort of interestingly it was kind of a little bit better. It was sort of like yeah, sort of not so bad. The worst was like New Zealand and Canada were the worst. I can't, yeah, England, US, UK, kind of after that. Um, Parts of the US being the best, but the US is a weird one. It's very split and divided. There's some parts are still really godly, and others are completely Babylonian. But the whole country is going to come under judgment. That's how some Christians would put it. But in reality, God's protection has just been lifted from the country because it's become so sinful. But I'm not, again, pointing the finger. The same applies to, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, and the UK. And then, Europe as well, like in parts of Spanish. The same applies to Spain to an extent. Europe's not as bad. So why am I saying all this? Well, it is partly relevant in terms to talk about this in terms of that group of five Anglo-Saxon countries, which is commonly referred to as the Anglo, sometimes referred to as the Anglosphere. I'll put a link to what that is in the description box below. And so, yeah, I'm seeing this image of this old friend of mine who was kind of represented arrogance and immaturity, just kind of like just a frat boy dick who's just like thinks he's an alpha male but doesn't. He's just like psychologically he's about 7 years old. That's what God showed me. And he just, I mean, don't even get me started. But like not really a good guy, and but bullies. I'm not perfect, but I'm essentially a nice guy, and he just freaking bullied me in the end, and would just belittle me and put me down and tell me I'm not masculine and I'm not mature, and it's like it's basically God showed me it's a bunch of horse shit. Yeah, and I mean it's like mature guys don't feel the mature guys don't feel the need to put other people down. Mature people in general don't feel the need to put other people down to feel better about themselves. And like and also pro tip, anyone who goes like if you need to tell everyone how much of a man you are, like or how beautiful, like no, you don't see any no beautiful woman goes around telling everyone how beautiful she is. She just is, and everyone is in awe of it. She doesn't need to say it. Like I had a friend in Vilcabamba, actually a cool American guy from Seattle, who joked about this. It's like, yeah, we're pigeons. We, pardon the swear word. Trying not to swear it on the channel, but he's like, yeah, we shit on cars. Yeah, yeah, pigeons. We shit on cars. That's what we do. I'm a pigeon. I'm a pigeon. Like, if you're a pigeon, you don't do that. Like, if you have to, if you're constantly talking about being an alpha male and being masculine and being a man, it's probably because you're an immature, toxic boy, man child. Pro tip. Yeah. So, yeah, there's a lot of good men and good women in the five Anglo-Saxon countries, including the US, and but the US is going to experience a lot of blowback from attitudes of arrogance like this. That's why my friend was there, and in the end, they're going to lose. He was kind of. It was a scene. It was like weeping. That was kind of the vibe. It was like mourning, and that was the he was over this. He was kneeling beside this body of water, and it wasn't the Mississippi. It was the Mississippi River opened up into an inland sea that connects the Great Lakes in the north with the Gulf of Mexico in the south. And this is what everyone has been shown in prophetic dreams of the future of the North American continent will happen after the / through the earth changes in the next 30 years. That's going to be one of the major changes. So this was God confirming to me that I'm being shown yet that yes, this will happen. And so presumably, although I haven't been shown that, all the associated all the associated changes that people have been shown that go along with that will happen to North America will happen as well. Other people have been shown there'll be the Pacific Ocean will come massively inland. Most of California goes underwater. It will come in, kind of inland to Arizona, and a lot of the East Coast will go underwater. I'll put links to the Gordon Michael Scallion map where you can see what this looks like. But essentially, what's going to happen is after World War III, we're looking at a scenario. I mean, yeah, like a lot of Texas, most of Florida. We're looking at after World War III. We're essentially looking at a scenario where the United States has lost its power, and it's also lost a lot of its land area. I think between probably 20 and 30% of its land area. But you have to consider where some of this land is being lost. The state of California, if it was a country, this was in the media recently, would be the world's fourth largest economy. I think bigger than Japan. Something's crazy. Like, so California is huge, and then you've got up and around New York, which New York is finance. Then you've got big tech in California, and Hollywood too. And then you've got sort of energy and oil in Texas. And a lot of Texas is going to go underwater, including areas where there are these gigantic oil refineries. New York is wiped out, and a lot of the East Coast, that yeah, northeast coast of Bosnia-Wash, the mega city. I'll put a link to what that is in the description box below too. That goes underwater, and then most of California goes underwater, and then the Great Plains produce something like 60% of the world's cereals, and a lot of that area is going to be beneath the oceans. So it makes sense that the US is going to lose a lot of its power because it's going to lose a lot of its land that's the most economically productive, whether just through human activity or through agriculture or whatever. Aside from the fact that 75% of the country and the infrastructure is going to be destroyed in the war, I've been shown that that was a confirmation of one of the dreams Jan de Villiers had. So yeah, the US will lose their mantle of power and they'll lose a lot of their land after the war. But I said in one of the prophetic dreams I did about South Africa, I'll find which one and put a link in the description box below and put a link to the timestamp where I talked about that. I said, they'll never get it back. I don't actually know that for sure. To be clear, I haven't been shown it, but it would. I would be surprised if they did, because it just looks like the US has had their time as an empire. So I'll put a link to this article. There's a blog entry I found about this online, and basically control of the world's money is critical if you're going to be the world's most powerful empire. So the US dollar has been the world's reserve currency since about 1921. And if you look at the period of time that countries have hold the world's reserve currency for, there's a kind of a pattern in it, like a periodicity to it. Like they is that a word? I don't know. There's a pattern to it, and countries hold it for a certain period of time, more or less, in the cycle, and then it moves on to another country, and that corresponds to the rise and fall of empires. So hang on, I'll just play this. Since 1450, Common Era, the year 1450, there have been 6 major world reserve currency periods. The first was Portugal from 1450 to 1530. The second was Spain from 1530 until 1640. The third was the Netherlands from 1640 to 1720. The fourth was France from 1720 to 1815, ending with the Napoleonic Wars. The fifth was Great Britain from 1815 to 1920, and the United States has the world's current reserve currency. The reserve currency currently, the current reserve currency, is that of the United States, the US dollar, and that's running from 1921, more or less. It's technicality there, but it's basically essentially from 1921 if you look into it until today. So if you notice, the currency span is around 80 to 110 years. So there's a clear cyclical pattern and dynamic to it. Sort of, and this corresponds with the life cycle of empire. Yeah, so listening to that it would make sense. It would follow based on the historical pattern. It would be a surprise if the US didn't lose its power, just no matter what scenario that unfolds under, and that power goes to another country. Interestingly, Senator Van Rensburg was shown that Germany will be the most powerful country on Earth after World War III, and that the mantle of world power will move from the US to Germany, which would make sense to me because I could do another video about that. But Germany hasn't had its time in the sun according to that, dynamic of who has the world power in terms of who has the world's reserve currency. Although we are moving to a point in the world where we're moving beyond empires, so who knows? It might just go to a world currency. We're moving towards like a one planetary consciousness, and we need that before we start going off into space, because you can't be fighting wars all over the planet in doing colonizing the stars. You have to have world peace before we can do that. It's a prerequisite. Just point out, just to be 100% clear again, not pointing the finger at the US. New Zealand is worse in this arrogance and darkness department, and I've experienced that here. It's just what God showed me. Okay, God bless, all the best, and I'll see you in the next one.